My name is Jackson Palmer. I'm 34 years old and I'm the kind of person who runs toward fire for a living. Wildland fires, structure fires, brush fires creeping through the sage east of Reno. I've seen them all, but nothing in my years of training prepared me for what I found behind that closet door. My parents hadn't answered the phone in 7 days. Not a text, not a voicemail call back, nothing. So I drove to their house on a Tuesday afternoon and the front door was unlocked. Inside, every drawer was pulled open. The couch cushions were slashed. There was a faint smell of gasoline near the garage and the kitchen table was flipped on its side. I was reaching for my phone to dial 911 when I heard it. A small scratching sound from the hallway closet. I opened it. My 5-year-old nephew Jadon was curled around a stuffed bear, shaking so hard his teeth clicked. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes and whispered one sentence. "Don't let Daddy come back." What my brother had done, what my parents had been hiding for 5 years, would take me 2 weeks to piece together. And every single piece was worse than the last. Welcome back to Com Drama Stories, where every story is a slow burn that stays with you long after the screen goes dark. If you've ever been the one in your family who spoke up and got punished for it, this one's going to feel personal. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Training is a strange thing. You don't feel it working until the moment you need it. I knelt beside Jadon, checked his pupils, felt his forehead. Warm, not feverish, dehydrated. His lips were cracked and his skin tented when I pinched the back of his hand. No bruises, no cuts. I wrapped him in the fleece blanket from the back of the couch, one of the only things still in its right place, and carried him to the kitchen sink. Small sips, buddy, just small sips. He drank like he'd been waiting for permission. While he sat on the counter holding his cup with both hands, I called 911 and gave the basics. Abandoned child, missing adults, home ransacked, not a burglary. The television was still mounted. The laptop was still on the desk. Whoever tore this place apart wasn't looking for electronics. They were looking for paper. The filing cabinet by my father's desk had been pried open with something flat. A screwdriver maybe. Every folder was pulled out. Contents scattered across the carpet. I picked up a few pages. Property tax statements, auto insurance, a copy of the mortgage. Somebody wanted documents. I found a pad of paper and some crayons in the junk drawer and set them in front of Jadon. He picked up a brown crayon and started drawing without a word. Steady lines, no hesitation. This child was used to keeping himself company. 2 officers arrived within 12 minutes. I explained the situation. They called CPS. The caseworker asked if any family member could take temporary emergency placement. I said yes before she finished the question. Jadon hadn't looked up from his drawing the entire time. I drove Jadon to my apartment in Sun Valley, 20 minutes north of downtown Reno. 1 bedroom, clean, not much in the fridge. I made him a peanut butter sandwich, and he fell asleep on the couch before he finished the second half. I sat at the kitchen table and scrolled through my phone. 14 calls to Mom over the past 7 days. Every single one went to voicemail after the 4th ring, which meant the phone was on. She saw my name. She chose not to pick up. That was a pattern I recognized. I grew up in that house on Arston Street. Dad worked as a mechanic at the Chevrolet dealership on Kitsky Lane. Mom was a receptionist at a dental office on Plum. Ordinary life, ordinary family. I enlisted in the Army at 18, not because I was running from anything, but because I wanted to carry my own weight. 4 years, 1 deployment to Helmand, combat medic. When I came back to Reno, I joined the Nevada Division of Forestry as a wildland firefighter. Good work, honest work, the kind that wears you out in the right way. My younger brother, Dylan, was 5 years behind me. He stayed, played football at UNR until a torn ACL ended his sophomore season, lost his scholarship, dropped out, started spending evenings at the Peppermill, then the Atlantis, then wherever would let him sit at a table. By the time I noticed the damage, my parents were already underwater. The last real conversation I had with Mom was 3 weeks before I found Jadon. She called on a Sunday. We talked about the weather, her garden, a recipe she'd tried, normal things. She said Dylan was doing better, working again. Everything's fine, Jackson. Her voice shook on the word fine. I told myself it was just the connection. 5 years. That's how long the bleeding had been going on. And for most of it, I was catching the story in pieces. A missed detail here, a half-truth there. All of it filtered through my mother's talent for making catastrophe sound manageable. It started with the knee, Dylan's scholarship gone. His football career finished at 20, and he was bitter in a way that settled into his bones. My parents covered his surgery and rehab out of pocket, $14,000. That part made sense. Your kid gets hurt, you help. Nobody questions that. 6 months later, Dylan hadn't looked for work. He had found a seat at a blackjack table at the Peppermill and convinced himself he had a system. My father told me this part later, years after it mattered. The first real debt was $8,000. Dylan came to the house at 2 in the morning, woke my mother, and told her the men he owed would hurt him if he didn't pay by Friday. Lorraine pulled $8,000 from their joint savings, money earmarked for the roof that had been leaking since 2019. She told my father it was for car repairs. And when I called the following week and asked how things were, she said, "He just needs one more chance." That phrase, I'd hear it a dozen more times over the next 3 years, each time with a higher price tag attached. 1 year later, Dylan owed $25,000. My father took out an equity loan on the house, $40,000 with $25,000 going straight to Dylan's creditors and the rest supposedly set aside for emergencies. Mom sold her mother's pearl brooch at a pawn shop on East 4th Street. She told me she'd misplaced it. I believed her because I wanted to and because I was fighting fires 300 miles away in the Toyabe Range and didn't have the bandwidth to interrogate my own mother. 2 years before I found Jadden in that closet, I organized an intervention. I'd done the research, called the Reno Problem Gambling Center, and asked for a counselor who specialized in family sessions. Her name was Dr. Tessa Marsh, and she met me at a coffee shop on South Virginia to prep. She said the same thing every counselor says: if the family isn't unified, the intervention won't hold. I told her the family would be unified. I was wrong. My mother called Dylan before we started, told him what was happening, told him just come so your brother stops worrying. So Dylan arrived 40 minutes late, sat down at the dining table where Dr. Marsh and I and my father were waiting, and listened for exactly 10 minutes before pushing his chair back. "You don't get to judge me, Jackson. You left this family." He looked at our mother. "I'll be fine, Mom. I just need time." Then he walked out the front door and drove away in a car I later learned he'd borrowed from a man named Garrett Boone. Dr. Marsh looked at me with the expression of someone who'd seen this exact scene 100 times. "Without family alignment," she said, "he'll treat your concern as an attack and her protection as permission." She was right. I called the Nevada Gambling Addiction Hotline that night and asked about involuntary treatment. The answer was simple and terrible. Nevada's involuntary commitment statutes cover substance abuse. Gambling doesn't qualify. There was no legal mechanism to force Dylan into treatment if he refused, and with my mother shielding him, he'd always refuse. I offered to pay for residential treatment at Mountain View. Dylan laughed. "I don't need rehab. I need one good night." Mom said, "See, he doesn't want to go. You can't force your brother." I couldn't. She was right about that. She was wrong about everything else. The year before the closet, I lost everything that looked like a support system. It happened in stages, the way most collapses do. Not a single blow, but a sequence of small fractures until the structure just gave. My weekly calls to Mom became arguments. Every time I mentioned Dylan, she'd go cold. "You called to check up on your brother, not to talk to me." I'd say I was calling because I loved her. She'd say if I really loved her, I'd stop trying to tear the family apart. One night I said, "If Dylan doesn't stop, you and Dad are going to lose the house." She hung up. Didn't answer for 3 months. My father called once during that silence, keeping his voice low like he was hiding in the garage. "Give your mother time, son. You know how she is." I knew exactly how she was. That was the problem. My marriage ended in the same stretch. Sarah filed in October. She was fair about it. No drama, no cruelty, just a woman who'd reached the end of something she couldn't name. She said, "You carry everyone else's weight, Jackson, but you won't let anyone carry yours." She was right, and I didn't know how to fix it in time. The divorce finalized in January. I moved into the Sun Valley apartment, 1 bedroom, no pictures on the walls. I worked. I came home. I ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter. Eventually, Mom started calling again. Short calls, light topics, weather, cooking, church gossip, never Dylan. I accepted the surface because the alternative was silence. And silence from your own mother is its own kind of cold. The morning after I brought Jadden home, I drove back to Arston Street. Different light now. Sunshine through the broken blinds, dust floating in the kitchen. The damage was clearer. Cabinet doors ripped off hinges. Photo frames on the hallway wall knocked sideways. One picture of our family, all 4 of us at Pyramid Lake, Dylan maybe 8, me 13, was cracked straight through the middle. I stepped outside and nearly walked into Ruth Calloway. She lived next door, had for 30 years. 71, widowed, former ER nurse at Renown. Snorts the kind of woman who noticed everything and said nothing unless asked. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she said. She told me what she'd seen. A black Chevrolet Silverado parked in the driveway last Tuesday around 11 at night. 2 men went inside. She heard shouting, male voices, more than one banging, something heavy hitting the floor. It lasted maybe 20 minutes. Then the Silverado left. After that night, Ruth said, "I didn't see your parents, but the kitchen light was on the next day and the day after." I figured someone was inside, so I left a bag of groceries by the front door. Bread, peanut butter, some juice boxes. She'd kept Jadden alive without knowing it. I wrote down her description of the truck. Black Silverado, chrome running boards, loud exhaust. Dylan didn't own a truck like that. I went back inside, walked the house one more time. Garage door was ajar. On the concrete floor near my father's workbench, an empty gasoline can lay on its side. That same smell from yesterday, sharper now, closer to the source. Someone had been careless or someone didn't care. Detective Louis Morales from Reno PD returned my call around 4 that afternoon. Professional, unhurried, the kind of calm that told me he handled cases like mine every week. We filed the missing persons report, he said, but there's no evidence of abduction, no blood, no forced entry from outside. The ransacking suggests a domestic dispute. Your parents may have left voluntarily. I understood what he was saying. Two adults who leave their own home aren't a priority. I told him about Jadon, about the CPS placement, about the Silverado. He took notes. We'll look into it. These things take time. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat in my truck in the driveway and made a different call. Tony Vargas. We'd served together in Helmand. He was a 68W like me, combat medic, except Tony had a gift for finding things. After discharge, he'd landed in the bail bond business in Sparks, which meant he had access to databases and contacts that a regular person didn't. I need to find out who drives a black Chevy Silverado in the Sparks Reno area. Chrome running boards, loud vate Tony, that's half the trucks in Woe County. This one parks near casinos and shows up at houses late at night. A pause, give me a day. That night I put Jadon to bed on the couch with a fresh blanket and a nightlight I bought at the Dollar Tree on my way home. He asked me to leave the bathroom light on. I did. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything I knew in one column and everything I didn't know in another. The second column was longer. Tony called back at 9:43. Name's Garrett Boone. You don't want to tangle with this guy. Tony gave me the outline. Garrett Boone, 45, owner of Gold Strike Pawn on B Street in Sparks, right by the railroad tracks. The shop was legitimate, licensed, inspected. Nothing on record, but behind the counter, Garrett ran a lending operation for gamblers who'd maxed out their credit and their family's patience. Not a loan shark in the movie sense. No baseball bats, no threats of broken kneecaps. Garrett was more surgical than that. He charged 30% interest on short-term loans, took personal property as collateral, and when payments stopped, he applied pressure. Slow, steady, suffocating pressure. Phone calls at midnight, showing up at workplaces, parking his Silverado outside someone's house and just sitting there waiting. He doesn't touch people, Tony said. He doesn't have to. The people he lends to are already scared. He just makes them more scared. I asked the obvious question. How deep is Dylan in with this guy? If Boone is driving to your parents' house personally, the number has more than 4 digits. Garrett doesn't leave his shop for small debts. The next afternoon, I drove to Sparks. Found Gold Strike Pawn on a strip between a tire shop and a vape store. Neon sign in the window, bars on the glass. I stayed in my truck across the street, didn't go in. I wasn't there to confront anybody. I was there to confirm. And within 8 minutes I saw it. A black Chevrolet Silverado with chrome running boards pulling around to the back lot. Same truck Ruth described. I wrote down the plate number and compared it to what Ruth remembered. Match. I gripped the steering wheel and reminded myself of something my captain told me on my first wildfire. Don't enter a structure you haven't sized up. Rushing in is how people die. 8 months before the closet, I ran into Dylan at the Walmart on North McCarran. Literally ran into him, rounded the corner in the cereal aisle, and there he was, holding a box of Frosted Flakes like a man who'd forgotten what he walked in for. He was thinner than the last time I'd seen him. Cheekbones sharper, dark circles under his eyes that looked permanent, but he smiled wide when he saw me. Jackson, hey, we stood in that aisle for 10 minutes. He told me he was doing better working some jobs. Freelance stuff, he said, which could mean anything from drywall to disaster. I asked where. He waved his hand around. Then I said what I always said. Dylan, Mom told me you're working again. Is that true? The smile dropped, his jaw set. And you're still the same guy who thinks he knows better than everybody. You left, Jackson. You enlisted and you left, and I stayed. I was the one here when Dad got sick. I was the one who drove Mom to her appointments. They chose me because I was present, so don't come to me with your disappointed big brother routine. I told him I wouldn't give him money. His eyes flickered, a quick calculation discarded. I never asked for your money. He turned to walk away, then stopped, looked back over his shoulder. You don't walk away from family, Jackson, remember that. He said it like a warning, like he'd rehearsed it. I watched him walk to the register with nothing but the cereal and a 12-pack of energy drinks, and I noticed something I couldn't unsee. His hands were shaking, not from anger, from the specific, involuntary tremor of a man whose body has learned to expect adrenaline on a schedule. The eyes I'd seen in the parking lot light weren't defiant. They were terrified. Tony pulled public records the next day. The mortgage on my parents' house showed 2 liens. The first was the equity loan I already knew about, $40,000 taken 3 years prior, but underneath it was a second. $30,000 opened 14 months ago. I had no idea. Nobody told me. My parents had leveraged their home for $70,000 total against a property that was worth maybe $280 on a good day. $70,000. And I was willing to bet every cent of it had gone to fund my brother's seat at a card table. I texted my father, kept it simple. Dad, I found out about the second lien. I'm not angry. I need to know where you and Mom are. Jadon is safe with me. I watched the screen. The message delivered, then read 2 blue check marks. No reply. I texted again. Where is Mom's wedding ring? Read, no reply. I sat with that silence for a long time. At the kitchen table, Jadon was drawing again. I'd been giving him paper and crayons every morning. It was the only thing that settled him. He drew the same picture over and over. A house, brown walls, a triangle roof, no door, two tall figures standing outside the house with their arms at their sides, not waving, not reaching, just standing there. I asked him once gently who the people were. He shrugged. Them. I looked at the picture again. A house with no way in, two adults locked out, or maybe a child locked inside. On the fifth night, Jadon started talking. Not a flood, a slow drip between bites of macaroni and cheese, between sips of juice, between long silences where he stared at the refrigerator like it might tell him what to say next. I didn't push, you learn that in the field. A person in shock gives information on their timeline, not yours. Grandma cried a lot, he said, fork scraping the bowl. Before the man came, I kept my voice level. Which man, buddy? The one with the loud truck. Garrett, what happened when the truck man came? Jadon chewed, swallowed. Daddy said Grandma had something he needed, a paper. Grandma said no. Daddy threw the lamp. He said it matter-of-factly. The way children describe violence they don't fully understand yet, like reporting the weather. I gripped the edge of the counter and kept my face neutral. Then what happened? Daddy looked in all the drawers. He pulled everything out. The truck man walked around the house real slow. He talked quiet. Jadon looked up. That was scarier when somebody talks quiet and you can still hear them everywhere. I poured him more juice. Waited. Grandpa told me to go in my room, but I went to the closet. The closet has a lock inside. A closet with an interior lock. My father had installed that years ago when Jadon used to play hide and seek, a playful addition that became a survival mechanism. I closed the door, Jadon said. I could hear Daddy yelling, then quieter. Grandpa wrote something. He put it in the box in the dark room. The dark room, my father's corner of the garage where the overhead light had been burned out for a decade and he'd never replaced it. The box, I stood there in my kitchen watching a 5-year-old piece together the worst night of his life between bites of macaroni and cheese. And I thought, this is what happens when love has no limits and no spine. When you shield someone from every consequence until the consequences come for everyone else instead. If that thought just hit a nerve, if you've been the one screaming into the silence while your family smiled, stay with me. This story isn't done yet. I drove to Arston Street the next morning while Jadon was with Ruth. She'd offered to watch him. CPS had approved her as a temporary caregiver after a quick background check, which for a 71-year-old retired ER nurse with no record and a 40-year residency was a formality. The garage was dim. I found the box where it had always been, a gray steel lock box under the workbench, half hidden behind a stack of old paint cans. Combination lock, 4 digits. I tried my father's birthday. Wrong. My mother's birthday. Wrong. I stood there in the dark, smelling gasoline from that spilled can, and thought about what a man hides in a box he doesn't want anyone else to open. I tried my own birthday. 317 March 17th. The lock clicked. He'd used my birthday, not Dylan's, mine. Inside, a stack of pawn shop receipts held together with a rubber band. 7 of them, all from Gold Strike Pawn and Sparks. The first was my mother's wedding ring, $1,800. Then her mother's brooch, $600. My father's vintage Seiko watch, the one he'd worn every day for 30 years. 400 costume jewelry, a silver tea set, a pair of pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's. Total just over $4,000 in family heirlooms, converted to cash at a pawn shop owned by the man who was bleeding them dry. Beneath the receipts, 300 in iOS, my father's cramped script, all addressed to Garrett Boone, $15,000 total, signed on behalf of Dylan Palmer. 8 months, 5 months, and 2 months ago, and at the bottom, a single sheet of lined paper folded twice. My father's handwriting shakier than usual. Jackson, if you're reading this, things have gone bad. Your mother won't call you because she's ashamed. I won't call you because she told me not to. Dylan owes Boone more than we can cover. I don't know what happens next. The storage unit on Glendale has the rest. Key is taped under the toolbox lid. I'm sorry, son, I should have listened to you. My hands didn't shake because I was scared. They shook because I was angry. My father knew, he knew everything, and he still didn't call. The key was exactly where he said it would be, taped to the underside of the toolbox lid with a strip of electrical tape. Small brass key, the kind you get at a self-storage place. Storage stars on Glendale Avenue, 10 minutes from the house. I found the unit in the back row. 5x5 concrete floor, fluorescent tube buzzing overhead, 2 cardboard boxes and nothing else. The first box held credit card statements. 4 cards, all in Dylan's name, all with the billing address listed as my parents' house on Arston Street. Combined balances, $48,000, maxed out, minimum payments missed for months. Letters from collection agencies folded inside. Dylan had been using our parents' address like a forwarding station for his failures. The second box was worse. A manila folder from Garrett Boone labeled D. Palmer active, containing what Garrett called an informal lending agreement. $35,000 at 30% annual interest. Due date 2 months ago, a handwritten note in red pen at the bottom. Payment overdue. Resolution required. I did the math on the floor of that storage unit. 70,000 in home equity, 48,000 in credit cards, 35,000 to Garrett, $4,000 in pond heirlooms, $157,000. My brother had consumed $157,000 in 5 years, and my parents had helped him do it, dollar by dollar, lie by lie, chance after chance after chance. I sat on the cold concrete and stared at the buzzing light and thought about the day I enlisted. I was 18. I told my parents I didn't want to be a burden. I wanted to earn my own way. I drove to Kabul and came home to this. I drove to the office depot on Kitska Lane and photocopied every document. Originals went into plastic sheet protectors. I bought a fireproof lock, $70, and stored everything in my apartment closet. Then I called Detective Morales. I have evidence, I said. Physical documents, pawn receipts, IOUs, credit card statements, and a handwritten letter from my father describing coercion by a man named Garrett Boone. Morales was quiet for a beat. Bring them in. I sat across from him at his desk at the Reno PD station on 2nd Street and laid it all out. He went through each document slowly, flagging items with post-it notes. When he finished, he leaned back. What you're describing falls under NR 205,092, exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Your parents are both over 60. If your father's letter and the IOS hold up, and if we can confirm Boone's lending operation is unlicensed, this is a prosecutable case. He paused. But I need a victim statement, a sworn affidavit from one of your parents, ideally your father, confirming these transactions were coerced or obtained through undue influence. Without that, these documents are suggestive, not conclusive. I understood. Paper doesn't talk, people do. That afternoon, I filed for a temporary protective order against Dylan through Woe County. NRS 33.01818 allows temporary orders without the respondent present if there's documented evidence of threat. I also submitted paperwork for kinship foster care through Woe County Human Services. And I called the Legal Aid Center to ask about emergency guardianship. The attorney there said, if the father is arrested and the mother is absent, your standing as the nearest stable relative is strong, but we need the arrest first. Everything depended on finding my parents. Everything depended on my father being willing to speak. Day 9. I was pouring coffee at 6 o'clock in the morning when my phone buzzed, a text from Dad. Fernley, Western Motel, room 14. Then a second message. Don't tell your mother I told you. Fernley is a small town 2 hours east on I-80, past the Truckee River Canyon, past the desert flats where nothing grows but sage and bitterness. I called Ruth and asked if Jadden could stay with her for the day. She said yes without asking why. I drove east with the windows down and the radio off. The Western Motel was a single-story strip along the highway. 16 rooms, a vending machine, a parking lot with cracked asphalt, and 3 cars. I found room 14 and knocked. My father opened the door. He looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. Unshaved, thin, wearing the same flannel I remembered from Thanksgiving. Behind him, my mother sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the television. It was off. Dad, Jackson. We stood there for a moment, the way men do when there's too much to say and no good way to start. I stepped inside. The room smelled like motel soap and stale takeout. I looked at my mother. Jadden's been with me for 9 days. He's okay. He's safe. She turned. Her eyes were swollen. Jadden. She said his name like she was tasting something she thought she'd lost. She didn't ask about Dylan. That absence told me more than any answer could have. My father sat down in the desk chair and put his hands on his knees. You found the box. I found everything, the storage unit too. Silence. Then my mother stood. You don't understand. Dylan was forced into this. Garrett forced. I cut her off. Garrett loaned Dylan money because Dylan asked for it. Nobody held a gun to Dylan's hand and put it on a card table. She stared at me. Then quietly, like a prayer she couldn't stop reciting, he just needs one more chance. I pulled out my phone and showed my mother the photograph I'd taken of Jadden's drawing, the house with no door, the 2 tall figures standing outside. She covered her mouth with her hand. The left hand, the one with the bare finger where her wedding ring used to be. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I looked at my father. Jadden told me what happened in pieces, the way a 5-year-old remembers things. He said Daddy came to the house and asked Grandma for a paper. Grandma said no. Daddy threw the lamp. Hank closed his eyes. He said the man with the loud truck came after. The man who talked quiet, he said that was scarier. When someone talks quiet and you can still hear them everywhere. My father put his face in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. Dylan came Tuesday night. He wanted the deed. Said he'd promised Garrett he could get it. That the house would cover everything. Your mother said no. First time she'd said no to him in 5 years. He went through the house like a storm, every drawer, every cabinet. Garrett stood in the kitchen and watched, didn't touch anything. Just said you have 48 hours. After they left, your mother packed a bag. She wanted to run, but Jackson, his voice cracked. She forgot Jadden was in the closet. The boy was so quiet, she thought he was with Dylan. She didn't realize until we were already on the highway, and by then she was too afraid to go back. She called Ruth the next morning and asked her to check, but Ruth's phone went to voicemail. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the floor. You left a 5-year-old alone in a house that had just been torn apart. She whispered, I thought he was with his father. His father, I said, is the one who tore it apart. I didn't raise my voice. I'd spent too many years in situations where calm was the only tool that worked. I sat on the edge of the other bed and laid it out. Here's what's going to happen. You're coming back to Reno. You'll stay at my apartment. Dad, you're going to the police station tomorrow morning to give a sworn statement to Detective Morales. He has the documents, he has the IS receipts, the letter you wrote. What he needs is your voice. My father nodded, slow, heavy, like a man putting down something he'd been carrying for too long. My mother stood up. If Dylan gets arrested, then Dylan faces the consequences of what Dylan did for the first time in 5 years. You can't ask me to testify against my own son. I'm not asking you to testify against anyone. I'm asking you to protect your grandson. If you don't cooperate, CPS is going to ask why a 5-year-old was abandoned for a week in a ransacked house. They won't be asking me that question, they'll be asking you. She flinched. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was stating facts the same way I'd state the wind speed at a fire line, not to scare anybody, but because the numbers don't negotiate. My father stood. Get your things, Lorraine. She looked at him, then at me. Something passed behind her eyes. Not agreement exactly, but the exhaustion of a woman who'd been holding up a ceiling that was never going to stop falling. She reached for her bag. I picked up my keys. On the way out, I held the door for my mother. She passed close enough that I could see her left hand, fingers bare, the skin slightly indented where the ring had sat for 40 years. The drive back to Reno was 2 hours of highway in silence. Hank sat in the passenger seat, watching the desert scroll past. Lorraine sat in the back, wrapped in her jacket, hands in her lap. I watched her in the rear-view mirror. Twice I saw her glance down at something below the seatback. I said nothing. At the apartment, I set them up. Couch for Hank, air mattress in the living room corner for El Rain. Jadden in my bedroom in the race car bed I'd bought at the Goodwill on Audi Boulevard 2 days earlier. Jadden ran to El Rain when he saw her. She held him so tight I thought she'd break. For a moment, she looked like the grandmother I remembered, the one who made lemon bars and sang hymns off-key. Then she put Jadden down and retreated to the kitchen without making eye contact with me. That night after everyone was asleep, I picked up my mother's phone from the kitchen counter. She'd left it charging. No passcode, she'd never figured out how to set one. I opened her messages. There it was. Sent at 4:17 p.m. while we were on E80 somewhere between Fernley and the Truckee River Canyon to Dylan. Baby Jackson knows everything. Your father is going to the police tomorrow. You should leave Reno. I'm so sorry. I took a screenshot, sent it to my own phone, put hers back. Then I walked out to the balcony and stood in the cold air looking at the lights of downtown Reno scattered across the valley floor. The casinos, the hotels, the neon promises that had swallowed my brother whole. I wasn't angry at my mother. I was past anger. She'd spent 40 years trying not to become her own mother, the woman who'd walked away from an alcoholic husband and left 11-year-old Lorraine to fend for herself. And in trying so hard not to abandon her child, she had abandoned everyone else. I was on the phone with Detective Morales by 6:15 the next morning. My mother sent Dylan a warning last night. He knows we're cooperating with you. He may run or he may escalate. Either way, we're on a clock now. Morales absorbed this without surprise. Can you get your father to the station this morning? We'll be there by 9. I drove Hank downtown in silence. He stared out the window and at one point he said, I should have done this 2 years ago. I didn't disagree. At the station, Hank sat across from Morales and a recorder and told everything. 5 years of debt, the pawn receipts the I owe us. Garrett Boone's visits. First polite, then insistent, then threatening. The night Dylan came with Garrett and tore the house apart looking for the deed, the 48-hour ultimatum, the flight to Fernley. Hank signed the affidavit. His hand was steady. Whatever weakness had kept him silent for years, it wasn't in the room that morning. Morales laid out the charges he'd recommend to the DA. Exploitation of a vulnerable adult under NRS 2000.2. 92, a Category B felony. Coercion under NRS 27.19. And for the Jadden situation, child endangerment under NRS 20,508. Arrest warrant will take 24 to 48 hours, Morales said. In the meantime, keep your family close and don't engage with Dylan or Boone directly. I nodded. Then I drove to the legal aid office and filed for emergency temporary guardianship of Jadden under NR SON 159A. The attorney reviewed my application, Hank's affidavit, and the CPS emergency placement paperwork I'd been carrying since day one. You have standing, she said. If the father is charged, this moves fast. Everything was lining up, but my mother had given Dylan a head start and I didn't know what he'd do with it. Ruth called me that afternoon. Her voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a woman who'd spent decades giving bad news in emergency rooms and had never unlearned the cadence. There's a truck, Jackson, black Silverado, drove past your parents' house twice in the last hour. Slow, real slow. I told her to lock her doors and stay inside. She said I was already inside. I've been watching since Tuesday. I called Morales immediately. He said what I expected. The warrant was still processing. 24 hours, maybe less. I drove back to the apartment. Hank was sitting at the kitchen table, coffee untouched, staring at the wall. He looked up when I came in. There's something else, he said. I sat down. Dylan told Garrett that your mother and I would sign over the deed. He made that promise before he even asked us. Garrett loaned him another $20,000 on the strength of that promise. Money Dylan burned through in a week. The number hit me like a second wave. So Garrett isn't just owed the original $35,000. He's owed 55 plus interest. My father wrapped both hands around his cold mug. When your mother said no to the deed, Dylan didn't just lose his leverage with us. He lost his leverage with Garrett. A man like Boone doesn't absorb a loss like that, he redistributes it. I understood then Garrett wasn't going to stop at phone calls and slow drive-bys. He needed the deed or he needed payment. And the only Palmer with any remaining assets was my father. Or me. They'll come here, I said, not a question. Hank nodded. Your brother knows where you live. Lorraine told him, of course she did. I spent the next 3 hours moving pieces into place. First call, Tony Vargas. I need Lorraine and Jadden at your place tonight. No connection to the Palmer name, no paper trail. Can you do that? Tony didn't hesitate. Bring them by 6. Second, I packed a bag for Jadden. Clothes, crayons, his stuffed bear, the drawing pad he'd been filling all week. I explained to him that he was going to stay with Mr. Tony for a sleepover and that Ruth from next door would be there too. He accepted this with the terrifying composure of a child who'd learned not to ask why adults rearranged his world. Third, Lorraine. She was standing in the kitchen doorway when I came out of the bedroom with Jadden's bag. What are you doing moving you and Jadden somewhere safe? This is ridiculous, Jackson. Dylan wouldn't. Mom, I set the bag down. You called Dylan. You told him Dad was going to the police. You told him to leave Reno. If Dylan showed that message to Garrett, Garrett knows we're cooperating with law enforcement, which means Garrett's timeline just got a lot shorter. If they come here tonight, I don't want Jadden in this apartment. She opened her mouth, closed it. You gave Dylan our position, Mom. I'm not angry about it. I understand why you did it, but I'm not going to let the same instinct that made you protect Dylan put Jadden at risk. She looked at me for a long time, then she picked up her purse. In the car, Jadden sat between us. Lorraine held his hand. She didn't speak the entire drive to Sparks. When I dropped them off, I told Morales, if they come to my apartment, I'll call. How fast can you have a unit here? 15 minutes, make it 10. The apartment felt different without Jadden in it. Quieter, but not the good kind. Hank sat on the sofa. I sat at the kitchen table. The television was off. We could hear the highway through the thin walls, the distant growl of trucks heading east toward Salt Lake. I'm sorry, Jackson. I looked at him. His face was gray under the kitchen light. I knew your mother was wrong. I knew it the first time she pulled money from savings for Dylan. I could feel it in my gut. The way you feel a bearing going bad in an engine. You can hear the wrongness before you can name it. But your mother, he rubbed his face with both hands. She grew up without a father. Her mother left when Lorraine was 11, packed a bag, and took a bus to Portland and never came back. Your grandmother decided she couldn't save her husband, so she saved herself. And Lorraine spent the rest of her life swearing she'd never do that. Never abandon a child no matter what. He looked at me. Every time you told her the truth about Dylan, she heard her own mother's voice saying it was time to give up. And she couldn't. She physically could not. I sat with that. You didn't lose your wife by telling the truth, Dad. You lost your family by staying quiet. He nodded slowly like a man agreeing with his own verdict. We sat in the silence for a while, then he said, your mother's ring. She sold it 8 months ago, told me it slipped off in the garden. I knew she was lying. I saw the indent on her finger where the gold used to be. I didn't ask. His voice caught. 40 years on that finger, and I didn't ask. I poured him a glass of water. Outside, a truck engine rumbled past. My hand tightened on the counter. False alarm, just a neighbor. 11:47. I was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing my coffee mug when I heard it. A specific sound. The deep, uneven idle of a Vate diesel that needs new injectors. You don't forget an engine note once you've learned to listen for it. I turned off the faucet and moved to the window. Through the blinds, a black Silverado pulling into the visitor lot, headlights cutting across the asphalt. It parked 3 spaces from my truck, 2 doors opened. Dylan got out of the passenger side first. Hoodie, jeans, sneakers that were too white for a man living out of borrowed rooms. He looked up at the building, scanning windows. Behind him, Garrett Boone stepped down from the driver's side. Leather jacket, work boots. He moved slowly, the way a man moves when he's in no hurry because he doesn't think you can stop him. I picked up my phone and called Morales. They're here, 2 males, visitor parking, Building 4, Apartment 4 Billion, Sun Valley Complex off Sun Valley Boulevard. Morales, unit is 12 minutes out. Do not open the door. I walked to the bedroom. My father was sitting on the edge of the bed, hands folded. He'd heard the engine, too. Stay in here, I said. Lock the door, Jackson. You already did your part, Dad. This one's mine. He looked at me. Then he nodded and closed the bedroom door. I heard the deadbolt click. I sat down at the kitchen table. Gasoline, that faint acrid edge, drifted through the gap under the front door, Garrett's truck idling outside. The same smell from the ransacked house, the same smell from the garage. The circle was closing, 2 knocks. Soft, almost polite. I stood up, walked to the door, opened it. Dylan stood in the doorway with his hands in his hoodie pockets. Behind him, Garrett hung back 3 steps, leaning against the railing with his arms crossed. The porch light threw sharp shadows across both their faces. "Hey, Jackson." Dylan's voice was steady, practiced. He'd rehearsed this on the drive over. "Can we talk?" "We can talk here." I didn't step aside, didn't invite them in. I stood in the frame of my own door and waited. Dylan glanced back at Garrett, then forward at me. "Mom called me, said you're trying to have me arrested." "I'm not trying to have you arrested, Dylan. I filed a report and presented evidence. What happens next is between you and the state of Nevada." His jaw tightened. The rehearsed calm was already cracking. "All I need is for Mom and Dad to sign the deed. Garrett clears the debt, I disappear, you keep Jadden, everybody wins. The house doesn't have enough equity to cover what you owe, you know that. And you have no legal authority to compel our parents to sign anything. It's their house. They can do what they want with it. They don't want to give it to your creditor, Dylan. That's why they ran." Garrett stepped forward 1 step. His voice was low, measured, the kind of quiet that fills a room without raising the volume. "Mr. Palmer, I'm a businessman. Your brother entered into an agreement. Agreements have terms. The terms weren't met. I'm not here to threaten anybody. I'm here because I'm owed money, and I believe your family has the means to resolve this." I looked at him directly. "You're also here at midnight at my home with the man who ransacked my parents' house and abandoned a 5-year-old child. Let's not pretend this is a business call." Garrett's mouth flattened. He wasn't used to being quoted back to himself. I kept my voice at the same level, speaking to Garrett, but loud enough for the balcony recorder I'd turned on before I opened the door. "You operate an unlicensed lending operation out of a pawn shop on B Street in Sparks. You charge 30% interest to gambling addicts who can't get credit anywhere else. You take personal property as collateral, including my mother's wedding ring, which you have on file for $1,800. You've been making implied threats to 2 people over 60 in their own home. Detective Morales at Reno PD has every IOU, every receipt, and a sworn affidavit from my father. What you're describing as a business resolution, the state of Nevada describes as exploitation of a vulnerable adult. That's a Category B felony." Garrett said nothing. His eyes were calculating, but the math wasn't adding up the way he'd planned. Dylan broke first. "You always do this." His voice pitched up, cracking on the consonants. "You always have to be the smart one, the right one, the one with all the answers. You left, Jackson. You walked out at 18 and played soldier while I was here. I was the one who stayed. They chose me. They didn't choose you, Dylan. They couldn't stop you." He was shaking, spit on his lower lip. "You don't walk away from family." "I'm not walking away." I kept my voice flat, even like reading a weather report. "I'm the only one still standing here." Dylan lunged forward half a step. Garrett grabbed his arm. "Don't." Garrett knew the moment Dylan put a hand on me, it stopped being a civil matter. I looked at my brother, thin, trembling, eyes red and wild, 29 years old and burning from the inside out. "He's had every chance, Dylan, every single one. Tonight Jadden gets his first." Blue and red lights swept across the parking lot below, then another, 2 Reno PD units pulling in quiet. No sirens, just lights. Dylan saw the lights and froze. The anger left his body all at once, like air from a punctured tire. And what replaced it was the same expression I'd seen in that Walmart parking lot 8 months ago. Fear, pure marrow, deep fear. Not of the police, of the fact that nobody was going to catch him this time. Morales walked up the stairs with 2 uniformed officers behind him. He nodded at me. "Professional." Then he looked at Dylan. "Dylan Palmer." Dylan didn't answer. Garrett was already backing toward the railing, hands up and open, posture practiced. He had been arrested before. He knew how the choreography worked. "Mr. Boone, hands on the railing, please." Garrett complied without a word. One officer cuffed him. Garrett stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, the way a man does when he's already running the conversation with his attorney. Morales turned back to Dylan. "Dylan Palmer, you're under arrest for exploitation of a vulnerable adult, coercion, and child endangerment under Nevada revised statutes." He recited the rest. Dylan stood there with his arms at his sides, and when the officer reached for his wrist, he pulled back. Not violently, instinctively, the way a child flinches from a hand. "Mom will never forgive you," he said to me. His voice was small now. The officer took his arm. "She'll never." "She already has," I said. "That's the problem." They led him down the stairs. He didn't look back. Garrett was already in the second car, silent, staring through the partition. I stood in the doorway and watched the lights pull away. The Silverado sat empty in the lot, engine off. The faint smell of gasoline faded as the night air moved through. I closed the door, leaned against it. From the bedroom, I could hear my father crying. Quiet, measured sobs, the kind a man makes when he's been holding them for years. They say blood is thicker than water. Maybe, but blood shouldn't be the reason a 5-year-old learns to hide in a closet. If someone in your life is confusing loyalty with silence, if you've been called the difficult one for refusing to pretend everything's fine, you're not wrong and you're not alone. Stay with me. There's one more thing I need to tell you. The next morning, I drove to Sparks to bring Lorraine and Jadden home. Tony met me at the door, gave me a nod, and said nothing else. He'd always been good at reading a room. Lorraine was sitting on the porch in a plastic chair, hands in her lap. She was turning the bare spot on her ring finger, a slow, unconscious rotation, the phantom of a 40-year habit. She already knew. Hank had called her at midnight, right after the cruisers pulled away. I sat down in the chair beside her, didn't speak first. That's a skill you learn in fire response too. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is let silence work. My mother left when I was 11, she said, not looking at me, looking at the street. My father drank every night. She tried for years. Then one morning, she packed a bag and took a bus to Portland, and I never saw her again. She smoothed her skirt with both hands. I was 11 years old, standing in the kitchen, watching the door close, and I made a promise to myself. I said, I will never be that woman, I will never give up on my child. No matter how bad it gets, I will love them enough to stay. She finally turned to me. Her eyes were red but dry. She'd cried herself out overnight. I thought if I loved Dylan enough, he'd come back. I thought my mother didn't love enough. That's why my father kept drinking. I thought love was the thing that fixed people. I looked at her. This woman who'd sold her wedding ring, lied to her husband, lied to her eldest son, abandoned her grandson in a ransacked house, all in the name of a promise she'd made to an 11-year-old version of herself. You weren't her mom, you were the opposite, and it still broke. She pressed her lips together, a long breath. I know, I put my hand on hers. I'm not asking you to stop loving Dylan. I'm asking you to love Jadden more than you're afraid of losing Dylan. She nodded. I didn't know if she meant it. I knew she'd try. I knew she'd sometimes fail. That's the deal when the people you love are broken in places you can't reach. Jadden was inside, sitting at Tony's kitchen table with a fresh stack of paper. He looked up when I came through the door, and something in his face shifted. Not a smile exactly, but a loosening. The tension around his mouth eased. He held up a drawing. I took it and looked. A house, brown walls, triangle roof. But this time there was a door, open, a tall figure standing in the doorway, one arm extended down toward a smaller figure. Their hands were touching. I folded the drawing carefully and put it in my shirt pocket. Not because it was poetic, because that's where my front pocket was. Hey buddy, we're going home. You're home, our home for now, for as long as you need. He slid off the chair and took my hand. His grip was firm for a 5-year-old. The grip of someone who'd learned that when you find a hand worth holding, you don't let go. On the drive back to Reno, Jadden fell asleep in his car seat within 10 minutes. I checked the rear view mirror every few miles. No Silverado, just highway and sage and the Sierra Nevada cutting a jagged line against the morning sky. At a red light on Mill Street, I glanced at the passenger seat. Lorraine sat with her eyes closed, one hand resting palm up on her thigh, fingers slightly curled around nothing. Here's what happened. After the lights stopped flashing, Dylan was charged with exploitation of a vulnerable adult under NRS 2,005,092, a Category B felony in Nevada carrying 2 to 15 years. Additional charges, coercion and child endangerment. His public defender negotiated a plea deal 3 months later, 2 to 5 years at Lovelock Correctional Center with mandatory completion of a gambling addiction treatment program before parole eligibility. The court issued a no-contact order between Dylan and Jadden until treatment completion and a supervised evaluation. I was told he cried at sentencing. I wasn't there. Garrett Boone's operation unraveled faster than I expected. Once Morales had Hank's affidavit and the IOS, he got a warrant to search Gold Strike Pawn. They found records of 43 active lending agreements, all unlicensed, all at predatory interest rates, all targeting gambling addicts in the Sparks-Reno corridor. 7 other families came forward within the month. Garrett was charged with multiple counts of unlicensed lending, elder exploitation as an accessory, and witness intimidation. His attorney tried to negotiate, but the volume of victims made a deal difficult. Last I heard, he was looking at 3 to 8 years. Gold Strike Pawn was shut down. The neon sign went dark. My parents kept the house barely. The $70,000 in liens didn't disappear, but we restructured the payments through a housing counselor at the University of Nevada's financial clinic. No more equity loans, no more cash withdrawals over $500 without a conversation. Lorraine started attending gammon meetings at the community center on West 4th Street, a support group for family members of gambling addicts. She went every Thursday night. Some weeks she came home quiet. Some weeks she called Dylan from the kitchen phone and spoke in a voice I wasn't meant to hear. I didn't stop her. Boundaries aren't walls, they're fire lines. They tell the fire where it can and can't go, but they don't pretend the fire doesn't exist. I was granted temporary guardianship of Jadden under NRS 159A. The kinship foster care paperwork finalized 6 weeks later. I switched to daytime shifts. Bought a second-hand dresser and a set of sheets with rockets on them. The storage room became a bedroom. Ruth Calloway brought lasagna every Tuesday evening, never asked about the case, never asked about Dylan. Just showed up with a foil-covered dish and said, "Thought you might be hungry." Every single Tuesday. 3 months after the arrest on a Wednesday night, I put Jadon to bed in his race car bed with the rocket sheets and read him a chapter about a bear who was building a cabin in the woods. He snorts like the part where the bear measured everything twice. "Uncle Jack, yeah, is the door locked?" I walked to the front door, checked it, came back, locked, okay. He pulled the bear up under his chin and his eyes closed. And within 2 minutes his breathing was steady and slow. I stood in the doorway of his room, watched the rise and fall of that small chest under the rocket blanket. Then I stepped back and closed the door gently. The door was closed, but I could hear him breathing. Same words as the first night, completely different world. I walked to the kitchen. Jadon's latest drawing was taped to the fridge, the house with the open door, the two figures holding hands. I filled the kettle and made coffee because it was 9 o'clock and there were dishes to wash and a lunch to pack for tomorrow. The apartment was quiet, not the silence of something missing. The silence of something finally still. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's a fire with no containment line and it burns everything it was supposed to protect. That's my story. 7 days of silence, one little boy in a closet, and a family that learned the hardest lesson there is. That shielding someone from consequences isn't devotion, it's fuel. If this story made you think about a conversation you've been putting off, about a boundary you've been afraid to draw, take that as your sign. Have it today. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share this video with them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.